Hey guys, it's Jory. I want to share something with you that I've been working really hard on, and I'm really excited that it's finally available. I have a new and improved Get Unstuck assessment because I know that so many of us, me included, continue to get stuck in aspects of our life where we just keep spinning, hoping for a different outcome. So this assessment is intended to help you uncover what are those patterns, where are those areas in which you continue to come up against the same challenges and are ready to create the change so you can actually create the long-term change that you're seeking. So in the show notes is a link for the Get Unstuck assessment. And I'm also starting my January cohort of the Journey Forward method beginning January 11th. That link is in the show notes as well. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I know this is going to be such a beautiful conversation because Peggy and I could have been chatting for quite a long time before we even hit record. So I'm really excited to welcome our guest today. Peggy Oliveria is here and is going to share such beautiful wisdom with us of her own journey and how she is now guiding others. So Peggy, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are.
Well, first, I want to say I'm really happy to be here and so excited to be able to chat with you and share with your listeners. So my journey forward, and I refer to it as a courageous journey, is so by training, I'm a psychotherapist, but I kind of am an accidental therapist. I never had any intention.
The accidental therapist. I love that.
I never had any thought really even of becoming a therapist. But I went to counseling when I was in my early 20s and went to a support group and left there that night saying to myself, I think out loud, why isn't anybody talking about this? If we just talked about it, we wouldn't have to struggle in the way that we do.
Yeah.
And I literally remember saying that. I remember what that felt like. And that was a long time ago. And I didn't know it then. And so this was before I went to school or anything. I was not yet, didn't even have a bachelor's degree yet. But that planted the seed for kind of the rest, the rest of the journey. Because after I got out of school, in my internship as a master's level social worker, basically your internship options are a therapist. And so I became a therapist working with children who had experienced trauma and were in danger of being removed from their home. And I loved the work and then ended up working at the same rape crisis center that I began my journey at.
Oh, wow.
And just from there, I developed my own private practice when I moved away and couldn't find a job that I wanted. And so I decided to start my own practice and still work with survivors and now work with people virtually. Same people for the most part, but I work with them virtually now.
Oh, wow. This is going from, needing your own healing to now beginning the path of healing others.
Yeah.
What was some of the things along the way that gave you the courage to attend to your own healing?
Well, it didn't feel very courageous, that's for sure, because what got me to go to counseling actually was a really, really difficult day. It was the anniversary of my mother's death, and she died on Christmas Day.
Oh, my goodness.
And on the anniversary of her death, my children were with my ex-husband's family celebrating the holiday. And so it was just my husband and I, and that's always hard anyway. So it was a really bad day. And I don't know what was said, but my husband said something and it really upset me. And I really overreacted because I was feeling all of that grief and all of that fear of not being a good enough mother, which is why my kids were somewhere else, because I didn't feel like I could provide the kind of Christmas that they deserved. And so all of that kind of came crashing in at the same time. And my husband was concerned for my safety and he called 911.
Wow.
And he said, you need to get help. And so that next business day, I don't remember what day that would have been. I think it was like 2 days later, maybe. I actually called the only place that I really knew, and that was the Rape Crisis Center, not thinking I needed to work on any abuse, just I needed help. And that was the only place I knew of. And I said that I was looking for a referral for counseling. And she said, well, do you have a history of abuse? And I said, well, yeah, but that's not why I'm coming for counseling. And she said, well, if you do, then you can come here and it's free and you're welcome to come and you can come in next week or something like that. And so I thought, well, okay. So I did. And that was what got me there. And then I started the group. I think I was only maybe had a few individual sessions. And then I started that group. And it was that first night of group that I left there saying, why isn't anybody talking about this? Because that first night, there was so much awareness, so much understanding in that first conversation with everybody, recognizing that I had felt so alone. I thought it was just me. I thought the way that I struggled was just me. And realizing, I think there were 5 or 6 of us in that group, and we all basically struggled in the same way. And that's what I left there feeling like, why aren't we talking about this?
You know, it makes me think of one of that components of self-compassion is common humanity, right? And we so often forget. And one of the things I'll often say to my clients is, well, you are unique. Your problems are not.
Yeah.
And yet we have this over-identification with our, a supreme uniqueness in a way that actually divides us.
Yeah.
And we think no one's going to understand me. Even if I were to talk about it, no one would get it. Nobody was there with me. And yet it sounds like what you found that very first day, just holding that container, having that container being held.
Yeah.
And giving permission to share your story is where actually that common humanity began part of your healing. Is that right?
Absolutely. That was such an important part of my healing, such an important part. And I tell people, so that's been almost 20 years ago. And I tell people all the time that I think that group work is such an important part of healing, particularly from the things that we tend to not talk about.
So you said this a couple of times of the things that aren't spoken.
Yeah.
So would you be willing to share what you feel are the things that people are afraid to say?
Well, it kind of varies a little bit, but our society tells us that strength is picking yourself up and moving on. And don't think about things from the past, just move on. And if you think about things from the past, you're dwelling. If you're thinking about things from the past, you're blaming other people. You're not taking responsibility for your life. And so then when people find themselves struggling in some way, they end up feeling shame because they shouldn't. Right?
As we say, should in air quotes, yes, right? That we're both doing, right? Stop shoulding on yourself.
Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. You shouldn't need to do that. You shouldn't be struggling. And that creates shame. It adds to the shame that particularly as childhood trauma survivors, you have so much shame already. And then that just adds to it. And so we don't talk about the fact that we struggle. We don't talk about the fact that we're wounded. And we just have difficulty being really safe, feeling safe to show up in ways that are really genuine. Because if we all showed up in a genuine way and we're able to say, instead of saying I'm fine automatically, being able to say even I'm stressed, it's been a stressful day, like what a difference that would make. if we could all just be a little bit more real.
Oh, it's huge. And, I've shared this before on the podcast, but as a therapist, I'm not a typical therapist in that I do show up as a whole person, because I do believe it's a disservice to my clients to role model the very opposite thing I'm teaching them and seeking them to find comfort and security around that vulnerability. So if I talk about myself, it's always in service of the work. And it's also authentic and genuine. So if I get on a call with the client and they say, Jory, how are you? I'm not going to give the stock fine, thanks, how are you? Unless I'm actually fine, thank you. Yeah. But, I will, if there is more authentically arising, the wisdom to be genuine without having to make that a burden. Yeah. To say, you know what, I'm actually exhausted today. Or, you know what, I'm going through a hard time. Thank you for asking. I appreciate you asking. Thank you for listening. And we can keep it succinct and yet within the service of the work, and yet role model authenticity.
Yeah. Make it normal to be honest about how we're feeling.
Yes.
Because we lose the shame around it.
Right. It never made sense to me in the very traditional psychotherapy model that the therapist is just this wall.
Blank slate, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
How can we cultivate connection and safety through one-sided? Because I'm guessing many people are in therapy because the people they wanted to connect with were a wall to their connection. So it can feel re-traumatizing. And I say trauma, both big T and little t, right? Yeah. So it's a fascinating dynamic to be given the space to authentically express how and where you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel the exact same way.
So how, given that you work with people who've experienced childhood trauma, I'm curious, how do you define trauma? Because I think this is one of those buzzwords, right, in the mental health field that some people might identify of, oh, yes, I'm a trauma survivor. Mm-hmm. And other people might think their experiences don't categorize as trauma. So therefore, they might not be able to benefit from perhaps, let's say, the work that you're doing, or even just the self-compassion to honor, wow, that was hard shit I went through. What you mean that was traumatic? So I'm curious, how do you define trauma?
So interestingly, as a trauma therapist, I still talk about trauma because it's something that we do need to acknowledge. But my work and the way that I talk about how we're wounded and the healing process and all of that, I really actually talk about it more from the perspective that we are all wounded. We are all wounded. I actually am not somebody who believes that everybody is traumatized. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily believe that, but we are all wounded. And that wounding might be just normal stuff the kids go through, just normal kinds of things, but still can leave a lasting imprint. And then, of course, so when I think of childhood trauma specifically, there are things that certainly can be abuse. Growing up in an environment that is really chaotic or unsafe because of what that does to our nervous system and never being able to feel truly safe. Sure. Anything that creates a situation where we don't feel safe within our body or in our home or in our environment. And that can look a lot of different ways. But to me, because we are all wounded, and again, like a lot of people, even people that have experienced extreme trauma, often don't identify it as trauma. Talking about the fact that we're wounded and how that can show up in our lives, the different ways that it impacts us in terms of relationships and sense of self and trusting the world, and even like being fiercely independent. So a lot of those kinds of things, recognizing that we might struggle in these ways, or we might see these patterns of behavior, but not really identify that there's a reason for it. Mm-hmm. And yet, so therefore we don't really do anything to try to change it. We just try to treat the symptoms that show up every once in a while.
Right. Maybe I've got to deal with anger. Maybe I've got to deal with trust issues, or maybe I just need a new relationship that is going to be different and therefore better perception thereof. Right.
or just like another like tool or a particular type of, let me go do EMDR for a session or two, and that's going to fix it all. Or let me do some tapping and that's going to fix it all. And then I'm going to be okay. And those things can be helpful. But when you don't really recognize that there's a connection to wounding, then you're never going to heal the wound, which means you're going to continue to struggle until you do. And one of the things that I say often is, and I actually said this to a client one time in a session, and it really stuck out to her. And then it kind of stuck out to me. And I was like, yeah, this is really true. You cannot heal what you deny is wounded. Whatever that wound is, and again, it could be something seemingly insignificant, and particularly in the scheme of things. But even somebody who's experienced horrific trauma, there could still be something else that wouldn't necessarily be considered trauma that still leaves a significant lasting impact. Like moving around a lot as a child. Like that might not be necessarily trauma inducing. It might be really great reasons that you're moving, and you might have had great friends every time you moved, but that's going to leave a lasting impact on whether you feel rooted or whether you need to continue to move around a lot, or
how you attach to a new place, or feeling like everything is completely impermanent.
And when you don't get to do that, what kind of stress does that create for you? So being able to recognize, this did have an impact. This is causing me some issues right now where I'm having difficulty feeling settled, or I'm having difficulty with whatever it might be, like really allowing myself to feel attached to somebody because it's only a matter of time before I leave, but it's not in our consciousness necessarily, right? Because everything was great when you were growing up.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful definition of looking at our experiences, because we all have wounds.
Absolutely. And we need to normalize that. That is not a weakness. It is not a flaw. It is a reality of being human.
It is a reality of being human. And part of the challenge, as I see it, is we may not have, most definitely not have had good role models.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just if we look at just parenting over the past 3 generations, just the parenting model has shifted. And even some of those traditional parenting paradigms could have been the source of a wound of kids should be seen and not heard.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we internalize our wound of my voice doesn't matter, or my voice is not honored as real and true. And therefore, I'm not going to speak up in relationship because it doesn't matter. I just have to sit here and look nice and pretty, or whatever it may be, right? Or perform or get the grades for acknowledgement or the achievements. But, our wounds in that case, I'm curious if some people then may think, oh shit, I'm actually more wounded than I realized. Damn it. Now what? So what would you say to that person who now maybe is a little bit overwhelmed or flooded by just how wounded they are, who maybe they thought, hey, when I didn't realize it was trauma, I wasn't traumatized, but now that it's wounded, I've got all these wounds.
So first of all, you've been living with it anyway. So nothing new is going to present itself. You've been living with it. So recognize that you've gotten through it. You've developed ways of dealing with it. You've coped with it, and you're now acknowledging it. And being able to acknowledge it is the first step in being able to heal it. And so you're impacted by it, whether you're acknowledging it or not. So recognize that. And once you acknowledge it, you can begin to connect the dots. And as we connect those dots, healing happens in those moments.
Yeah.
And then you move forward from there.
So when you say connect the dots, I imagine what you would mean, but to someone listening, connecting the dots may be looking at the implication, as you were saying, on relationships or self-identity or self-concept, stuff like that would be the connecting of the dots.
Yeah. Recognizing the ways that you maybe struggle, or the things that kind of stress you out, the things that cause you to be too detached or attached in a situation, the things that cause you to feel like you can't count on anybody, like recognizing these patterns that play out over and over again that don't feel good or don't serve you well, and recognizing that there's a reason that that's happening. It's not that you're weak.
Yeah.
It's not that you're not getting it. It's not that you're not trying hard enough or that you're not deserving enough of it. It's that there's a reason this wound has caused you to show up in the world in a certain way because of what you believe
Right.
about who you are. And so connecting the dots is, okay, so this struggle, like my difficulty feeling really letting myself go after the things that I want, that's not because I'm lazy. It's actually because this thing taught me that it wasn't okay to go after what I wanted, particularly maybe as a woman. Or it's not that I'm lazy, it's because, or not capable, it's because I'm afraid of failing because that was such an important thing in my family that you had to do great at everything you did. And what if I don't?
Right.
So therefore, I'm not going to go after it because I don't want to be seen as a failure.
Right. So if acknowledgement is the first step, and the acknowledgement is what gives you the ability to begin to connect the dots, what would you say are some of the next steps of some of this process that you guide people through?
So in my work, that acknowledgement really is such a significant part of it. And then when you're able to kind of connect those dots, I think it's really important to actually practice really honoring that, really being able to see and experience it from a place of compassion for the fact that you struggle, compassion for the way that it might have affected you as a kid or even as an adult, but approaching it from an honoring of, okay, there are reasons, it makes sense, have understanding and compassion for it. And from there, you kind of build a bit of a foundation to be able to recognize that it's okay to be vulnerable, that those things that you believe about who you are as a result of that you're lazy or weak or undeserving or whatever it is that you believe, that's a result of the wound. It's not based in truth. And when you recognize what that belief is, and this can take a little bit of time, but you recognize what is the belief that you hold on to about that. And then we do the work, and this is why it can take a while, but then we do the work of really, in a sense, it's very much like deprogramming.
Yes.
Because those core beliefs are generally unconscious. We have no idea that they're there, but they drive everything. And so we dismantle those existing beliefs that are based on lies that we tell ourselves and maybe even that other people have told us. We dismantle that so that you can then see and internalize what is true, that you are deserving, that you're enough, that you are not lazy, that you are not weak, that you're not, whatever you've been holding on to.
Yeah, it's so deeply powerful. And, it's so beautiful that what you're offering is people to do some of what I would even name as a little bit of that reparenting, right? To be able to show up as your own idealized parent that perhaps they were unable to do from their wounds, right? We all have their own core wounded places. And I actually guide my clients through a 4-step process of looking at that moment of their inner child of where their core wound, the age of their core wound, and writing a love letter to themselves from their current self in the voice of an idealized parent. And I've had clients get so creative in writing this because they'll completely embody the environment in which their younger self was in. Like, here's a bowl of sherbet ice cream, really sensory description. And I mean, that in and of itself is a very healing part of our inner child and these core moments, regardless of how old that inner child is. Right. It could be, 5 years ago. But then I guide them through this process of then writing a letter of anger to the person who inflicted this core wound, usually a parent, just to get it off their chest. Yeah. Right. Maybe they've been either so afraid to express anger or afraid of the emotional backdraft that the anger might have of, if I open that door, I'll be flooded and then what's going to happen. But I think we hold that in for fear. We've been protecting this other person, protecting ourselves. I always advise to write the letter and then burn it. I think ritual is really powerful, but it's not about writing it and giving it to that person. I don't think that's always the healing intention, just to make it clear for those listening. But then the really powerful shift is to then, write a letter of compassion for what that person must have been going through that prevented them from showing up in the way that you would have needed. And, we don't often think about what was their wounds that prevented them from being there for us that caused our own wound. And when we can have compassion, and there's many cases where perhaps this may not fit. If you were raped, it may be really hard for you to have compassion for your rapist. However, there likely is deeply core wounds in which pain was the only way to express oneself, but, I'm talking more familial traumas of childhood. And then to really write a letter of gratitude. Thank you for teaching me who I don't want to be. Thank you for teaching me the values of how I want to show up as a parent or as a partner, or the values of importance of what's in my life and my own worth. And this, this healing is never a one and done.
Oh, absolutely not. And
right.
That's part of the struggle, I think, so often for people is they think, when they decide that they're going to do that work, like, okay, I realize that I have this wound. I'm going to do this work. They're like, okay, I want to jump all in and tell me what to do. I'm going to do it. And of course, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
And it is a struggle.
They're like, wait, where's my money back guarantee? I'm still hurting.
Yeah.
But I think it's so fascinating. And, this is something that's been part of my story is, I was told from my ex that for the time I was a teenager, that I was high maintenance. And I was high maintenance and he was a low maintenance mechanic. And from the time I was 15, I had that wound and that belief about myself of I'm too much.
Yeah. And
I ended up getting divorced, and I'm with my current partner. We've been together almost 6 years. And I figured, when we first started dating, you know what, I'm just going to make sure you know who I am fully before you decide to engage in partnership with me. And, I said, apparently, I'm high maintenance. And he looked at me, he's like, wait, what? I said, yeah, apparently I'm high maintenance. And he's like, no. And I think the word I actually said was I was needy. And he's like, you're not needy for having needs. And it was, this almost 25-year-old wound I'd been carrying, thinking something was wrong with me, where now I can acknowledge, wait, we just had different needs.
Yeah.
And that wound that I thought was my identity, now that I've got a partner whose needs and mine align, it's not a wound. It was just a values difference, or really like having ability to reframe the wound and then to let go of the story I held on to for 25 years was incredibly freeing.
Yeah.
But I had internalized someone else's viewpoint of my needs in a relationship in a way that didn't serve me.
Absolutely. And that is a great example of how, like, the idea of being wounded in a sense, but not really recognizing exactly what that might mean for you. And even to like warn this new man, just so you know.
I just want to be fully transparent right up front.
Yeah. And in all reality, your needs probably scared him that he wasn't able to fulfill. He wasn't able to be what you needed him to be or wanted him to be. And that he probably felt inadequate. So instead of, so he projected that onto you, that you're the problem.
Yeah.
In expressing your needs.
Yes. It's fascinating. We can internalize this one single message.
Absolutely.
And carry it until we recognize I don't need to carry that anymore. I can put that down.
Yes. And sometimes it really is just that awareness. It's just that recognition of, oh, wow. Yeah, that really has made me believe for 25 years that I am too high maintenance.
It's fascinating. This, inner child or our inner wounded work. I think you're right. We all have some degree of pain and wound in our lives by merely the fact of just simply being human.
Absolutely. Yeah, because life is hard. Being a kid is hard. Finding your way as a kid through the developmental stages, it's challenging. So there's inherent wounding for the most part that people are going to experience, especially as you mentioned, like if you go back generationally and the parenting models, right? Because it's like, well, just ignore that, pick yourself up, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt me. No, the words hurt a whole lot more than the sticks and stones do. So it's just those kinds of things that are, again, normal kinds of experiences and aren't really trauma specifically, but still leave such a lasting impact.
Oh yeah. My sister and I are 10 years apart, and my mom, I'm the youngest, and I had remembered when I was young, my mom referred a lot to a parenting book that she had read in between my sister and I. I've got a brother in there too. He's closer to my sister's age, but the book was called Between Parent and Child, and it was written by a guy named Dr. Chaim Ganat back in the late, maybe it was early 70s, mid 70s. And it was right at that cusp of the children should be seen and not heard model. And he was a big believer in validating kids' emotions and validating their experiences as real and true. And I remember as a young kid, my mom giving me examples from the book. One of them was a kid coming home from school one day, upset that the field trip got canceled because of the rain. Mm-hmm. And the parent just being like, oh, don't worry, it's not going to rain tomorrow. It's going to be fine. And well, A, they don't know it's not going to rain tomorrow. And B, you completely bypass the opportunity to connect compassionately and empathically with the emotions your child is experiencing. And, just to honor, wow, that's a big bummer when the field trip get canceled, isn't it? And just to leave it at that, and when I was in graduate school, I read the book. And ironically, one of my favorite mentors in graduate school was John Gottman, who had done work with relationships. Yeah. And one of John Gottman's books is dedicated to Dr. Chaim Ganat. So it really became full circle for me. But what really I think is the takeaway, which relates directly to what we're saying, is validating someone's experience as real and true, period. Yes. Regardless of if you agree or disagree, regardless if you can see the wound of it hurting or not see the wound, right? Whatever that is, but to just have the language around acceptance of what I see you feeling is real for you. I don't need to judge if it's right or wrong, good or bad.
Yeah.
It's just, let me honor what you're feeling is real and true.
Yeah. And that is going back to that idea of those kind of steps in honoring that wound, being able to honor that from a place of, like I said, understanding and self-compassion, and not from a place of, okay, well, now you just need to get over it. Or, okay, now you just move on because it really wasn't that big of a deal. Because that just furthers the wound. It just reaffirms the idea that, okay, it's really not something that should have an impact. So you should just move on. And just like you were saying, those examples that you gave, it's important to honor that. Like, yeah, a kid's going to be bummed out when the field trip is canceled. And it's natural and normal for a kid to be bummed out about that. Doesn't mean that the kid needs, therapy about it. But it's important for the parent to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm really sorry that happened, or I'm really sorry, I hope it works out tomorrow, or whatever, just some sort of an acknowledgement instead of the typical kind of thing that certainly in the 70s and even 80s, I think probably would have happened. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say, the last thing a kid's ever going to do is relax and calm down just because you told them to relax and calm down, right? Yeah. Like the last thing anyone's ever going to do when you say get over it is to actually get over it.
No matter how old we are.
No matter how old we are. And, I get really, when I'm working with my clients, really nitpicky on language, because I think the language that we speak to in our own minds is, I believe, actually more powerful than language we say out loud, because we are our own inner critics. And I believe, right, that we can have this wound and then we can keep picking the scab at our own wounds over and over and over again with our inner critic and our expectations and our judgments and our assumptions and, the feelings of low self-worth. I mean, all of that. But if we can change that inner voice, like you said, to go back to acknowledgement or acceptance or compassion, I'm sure you and I both use those words a lot, and I don't think it underestimates the impact of those practices.
Absolutely not. And I would say, in terms of like the steps, self-compassion is at the heart of
Yes.
all the work that I do. And I didn't really realize just how much it plays a role in my work until I wrote a book about self-compassion. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, yes, this is so a part of every aspect. It's a continuation or a continual process of really cultivating a natural state of self-compassion. Because then there isn't the judgment. There isn't the inner critic. There's the inner compassionate witness and support.
Do you have a favorite self-compassionate phrase that people can repeat to themselves when they're really needing that cultivation of that kind state? What's one of the things that you really love to remind people that is an accessible mantra or phrase or words to tap into that self-compassion?
That's a great question. And I think kind of it relates in all ways. Is the idea, so something along the lines of an acknowledgement that there is no perfection. And just as we do not expect anybody that we love to be perfect, that we can love them with their flaws and sometimes even love some of those things about them, that we can also be loved and accepted and valued in our imperfection. And that on a good day and a bad day, that just like the people that we love, we are always and in all ways enough.
Yes. I love that. I love the always. I think that's such a beautiful iteration there. My favorite self-compassionate phrase is to simply just say, this is really hard right now.
Yeah.
With just a tone of kindness.
Yeah.
And just the offering of that. I mean, I think what that statement is doing is coming back to your point of acknowledgement. Can I acknowledge with kindness where I'm at without judgment, without shame, without assumptions that I should be responding any differently? Because at the end of the day, I'm human.
Yes.
And this being human is hard damn work.
It is. It's complicated. It's hard. And there are always going to be challenges that come up.
Absolutely. So, Peggy, I love the work that you're doing. I can, really just honor the deep wounds that we all have. And I hope that anyone listening today has found our own acceptance of their wounded places. And hopefully that gives a little seedling for their own acceptance and puts them on a trajectory to create that state of kindness. Because, I think when we heal, we give ourselves the ability to heal others as well. So it's a ripple effect for sure.
Absolutely. I believe that wholeheartedly. My healing helped my husband heal as well.
It's beautiful, and you're role modeling that for everyone you work with, right?
Yeah.
So if people want to know more, how can they find you? What's the best way to connect?
I'm most active on Facebook on Courageous Journeys. You can find me at Courageous Journeys on Facebook. And I also have a YouTube channel where I share videos pretty much weekly. And there it's just my name, Peggy Oliveria. So those are the places I'm most active. And then I also have a website, courageousjourneys.com.
Beautiful. And we'll have those links in the show notes. Peggy, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been beautiful to connect with you. And I wish you well, and thank you for the work you're doing in the world and sharing your light. It's definitely a much needed light for many to receive.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
All right. Thank you so much, Peggy. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And I wish you all ease and peace. Take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat, visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.